I'm going to be sharing with you guys the Explain Like I'm 5 version of Bitcoin. This is the abbreviation for the Bitcoin sign, just like the dollar has its own sign. And it's the first decentralized cryptocurrency. And hopefully we will all have a basic understanding of how Bitcoin works and especially why it's so valuable. Now, it was invented in 2008 by Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, this is an unknown entity. We don't know if it was one person, a lot of people, or yes, aliens. Believe it or not, yes, some people say that this technology is so advanced that aliens may have sent it to us anonymously in order to help further human civilization. So what is a cryptocurrency? All it is digital money that cannot be issued by a central bank. Bitcoin is the top leader and contender. This was the first and most valuable asset. There's thousands, if not tens of thousands of different cryptocurrencies out there, and they all do different things a little bit. Like this one, you can put programs on it. This one is the cryptocurrency that the banks are going to be using. Trump has actually spoken with the leaders of this one. Tether is just a cryptocurrency that's tied to the dollar. Solana is a program that Facebook is using, and it's actually more likely that if you're trying to get rich off of crypto, you probably want to get Dogecoin since it's only 1/4. Imagine if this hits the same price as Bitcoin. In early 2011, Bitcoin was $1. If you had just bought $10 worth, because the recent high was over $100,000, you would be a millionaire with $10.
$1 million.
And even though it's $96,000 at the time of this video, if you invest $100, if Bitcoin hits $1 billion one day, then you would also be a millionaire. The key here is to identify a future technology that is going to become the future. Imagine if you could have invested in Microsoft or Apple when they just came out. You do not want to be like this guy. Now, this was a real post in 2010. This guy said he would pay 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 large pizzas, and he got it. Now, at the time, 10,000 Bitcoin would have been worth about $41, but now with Bitcoin's price right now, that pizza would be worth $1 billion. With 2 pizzas that are normally 8 slices each, that would be $62.5 million per slice. And this is just with the prices that we have right now at 100K. Knowledge is power, and I want to make sure that you guys are knowledgeable in this aspect. Now, let's say that you're walking along the street and you see a piece of paper with a bunch of random characters on it. But if you knew that this might be a Bitcoin private key, then you would know that you could at least try to log into an account with this key. Whereas most people would walk by it, see it as a bunch of jargon and trash, and never know that they just walked out on generational wealth. So how does Bitcoin work and what can we compare it to? A simple analogy would be gold. Gold has a lot of similar attributes to Bitcoin. The first similarity is that there is only so much Bitcoin in the world, just like there is only so much gold. Right now, estimates of how much gold is left in the world range anywhere from 50,000 metric tons to 64,000 metric tons. After we get the rest of the 64,000 metric tons worth of gold, that's it. Bitcoin is similar in that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever produced. This is just a part of the program. It's embedded in the code that once it reaches 21 million, it cannot continue. Also, just like gold, it gets harder and harder to mine Bitcoin. In the beginning of Bitcoin, you could literally just make your own Bitcoin off a cheap old laptop. If you had the program, you would just run it, and just like the guy that sold the pizzas, you could have easily thousands of Bitcoins just with a small little laptop. Over time, though, this has got incredibly difficult. You see, these math problems are designed to get harder and harder over time. Every 4 years or so, it gets twice as hard, in fact, to produce these Bitcoin. If we look at the total supply right now, there's almost only less than 1 million Bitcoin remaining. After that, it's gone. When we look at gold, we are looking at a ore that is produced in the earth that is mined by miners. Here we have some miners that are panning for gold, and in a very similar way, we have programmers that mine for Bitcoin. But another very important point when it comes to currency is, how do we know something is authentic? Well, the way that we know that this gold is actually gold is through a process called stamping. Now, this has its own weaknesses, but for the most part, we'll stick with this if you ever look at one of your gold necklaces or anything like that, you'll see that there is a stamp somewhere on the gold piece that tells you how much it's worth and that it's authentic. The reason that Bitcoin is so valuable is because it does the exact same thing in a permanent way. While gold can be stamped with anything technically, and there's chemical tests and stuff that you can do on it to truly verify that it's gold, but blockchain technology enables Bitcoin to be completely permanently unchangeable. You can't mimic Bitcoin because it's all on what's called the blockchain ledger. Whereas with a bank controls these gold bars and distributes them through the form of debit cards or money at a central location, Bitcoin can be distributed from anywhere in the world. This is called decentralization, and this is a word that you will hear more and more in the future. Now, the Explain Like I'm 5 version of the ledger would be everyone can see this giant ledger, making everyone honest. The transactions that you make and the account that you have is tied to a blockchain, making it impossible to double spend. Have you ever been at the gas station and you fill up your gas tank and it only takes out $1 or $2, but you forget about it, but you actually paid $20 of gas? Then you go somewhere else and you buy something worth $20 and you only had $20 in your bank. When the gas purchase catches up with your bank, it charges it again, and now you're negative money. That's called double spending. And double spending cannot happen with Bitcoin because of this giant ledger that everyone can see. And that's done through cryptography. Now, I know it sounds scary, but we're going to keep it simple. SHA-256 is a protocol that just takes a string of text and jumbles it up into what's called a hash. Even though these are the two same sentences, because this one has a tiny little period, it completely changes the hash over here. It's basically just a code, and that's all we need to know. The best way to simplify this cryptography stuff would be to compare it to an email. Did you know that Gmail passwords can be up to 100 characters long? Now, I don't know about you, but my password is definitely not that long. But because it can be up to 100 characters long, and because there are programs out there that you can spam password attempts, and yes, it's completely legal to download these programs. It may not be legal to do certain things on these programs, like cracking people's passwords, but you can download this anywhere. And there's tons of these out there online. But because these programs can just keep trying these password attempts over and over and over, which is a process called brute force, while incredibly unlikely, it is possible that these programs could find out your password. And this is kind of how like cryptography works, and why Bitcoin and some blockchains can require a lot of energy usage. For the email example, it would test A, and if A is not your password, then it goes on to B. If B is not your password, it goes on to C, and on and on and on. Now, because the standard computer keyboard has around 104 key characters, if your password is only one letter long, then there's only 104 possibilities. This would be very quick to find out, right? Now, this is just with one character, but what happens if you make your password 2 characters? Well, now you have to square those amount of characters by 2, because that's how many different combinations you could have. But then you also have to add what if it's 3 characters long or 4, and the total number of possible password attempts is so large. I'm not an expert in cryptography. My math could be a little off here, but you guys get the point. When Bitcoin is creating these possible attempts and solving this essentially a math problem, it's looking for this password. And that password could be enormous, requiring tons of energy and making it virtually impossible to hack. Now, this code only works one way, and that's what makes it immutable. When this math puzzle is solved, it's called a proof of work, and a block is created. Just picture this block as a bunch of text that solves the math problem. When this happens, it says, hey, I just solved this math problem. Here is a Bitcoin that's tied to your account. Then it says, all right, that was fun. Now I'm going to make another Bitcoin. And it solves another math problem that becomes harder and harder and harder. When it finally finds the correct solution, it solves that math problem. Hey, we did a great job. Here's another Bitcoin. Cryptographic technology enables the unchangeability of Bitcoin blockchain's transaction history because it has a previous hash that ties it to the one before it. The Explain Like I'm 5 version would be every math problem helps solve the next math problem. If we look at the blocks here, we can see that this hash number was 6U9P2. So this would be the very first Bitcoin. But once it started creating the second block, which would make the next Bitcoin, it requires the previous hash code. So basically, it needs the previous this mathematical solution in order to create a new Bitcoin. Once it does that, it does the same thing over and over again. The previous hash here was 8Y5C9, which was the solution for block 2. It's kind of like every single password has its own password. So now we understand that Bitcoin is essentially just a bunch of solved math puzzles that are kind of strung together by hashes. But what are hashes? Now, a hash, which is what we were looking at, is a unique identifier. So stick with me here. Hashes are used to verify that the data in a block hasn't been changed. Remember how each hash has a previous hash solution, so every single one is tied to the previous one? Those are what essentially makes blockchain possible. Just know that it's a bunch of hexadecimal numbers. Remember the simple sentence that we looked at earlier? Take a look at this. Here is a mouse, here is a blue mouse jumping over the green cat, and then the blue mouse jumps over the green cat. So we got some misspellings here, all in the word over, but when they're put through that coding program, it spits out these hashes that we were talking about. And again, they are all completely different from each other. The explain like I'm 5 version would be everything on blockchain is essentially a ledger. A ledger is basically just a way to keep track of your finances. It's just a way to keep track of your income, expenses, your balance, stuff like that. Now, let's say that on the blockchain, Dr. Ernst made 1 Bitcoin. He was the creator. He's secretly Satoshi Nakamoto, and he made the first ever Bitcoin on the 22nd of this year in February. The ledger would just write down Dr. Ernst has 1 Bitcoin. Now let's say I go up to Dr. Ernst the next day and say, please let me have some Bitcoin, it sounds cool. And Dr. Ernst is an awesome, very nice professor, so he sends me half a Bitcoin. That would be also tracked on the ledger. The next day, Andy says, hey, that's pretty cool. Can I get a little bit? I just want to have a tiny bit, just to say I have some. So she creates an account very quickly, and I send her 0.001 Bitcoin. That's also tracked. Now Adriana makes 1 Bitcoin because she decides she's gonna make her own as well. She wants to cash in on this. She makes one on the 25th, and then the next day she wants to test out that it works, so she sends Dr. Ernst a tiny bit of Bitcoin. All of this is tracked on a ledger, and this is all blockchain. Okay, but how do I know I can trust this ledger that just exists somewhere out there? How do I know somebody won't just take all my Bitcoin? Well, that's because this ledger, the blockchain for Bitcoin, is freely available to download, and you can literally go download it right now. Make sure you have a lot of empty space, but hypothetically, you could literally go download the entire blockchain history of Bitcoin. And this is what keeps it decentralized. If you looked at the code for it, you would just see a bunch of hash transactions and a bunch of block numbers. Remember how we were talking about hash and blocks? And this ledger just keeps track of it, while also keeping track of where that Bitcoin is being moved around. Now, all of these nodes exist all over the world, owned by different people in different places. You don't even need to try to earn Bitcoin to have a copy of this. You can just download it. Because so many different people have this ledger, this is what creates true decentralized consensus. It doesn't matter who you are. You can always check on the log to verify that your Bitcoin is owned by you and nobody else. Let's say a new transaction is entered. Whether it's creating a Bitcoin or sending some Bitcoin, this transaction is transmitted to a network of computers that are scattered all around the world onto this ledger. These computers would solve these math equations to confirm the validity of the transaction. Once confirmed to be legitimate, they are turned into a long history of blocks creating this ledger. And then boom, you've got your Bitcoin. And you would check that through any kind of app that allows access to the Bitcoin network, like Coinbase or Cash App. And you'd be able to use your Bitcoin and spend it through any kind of app or system that allows access. So here it is broken down. You have some miners and they mine for gold using hard work. Once they have the gold, they send it to a factory somewhere where they melt it all down and stamp it with an official seal. Once that happens, it's sent to a bank where the bank distributes your money in the form of debit cards and things like that. And this is just how Bitcoin works, only way more secure. You have the programmer or miner also that works hard through the use of energy on their computer, solving those math problems and turning them into Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is authenticated throughout the entire world through the use of the ledger, which anyone can see, but instead of going to a central bank, it goes directly into your pocket. No taxes. And the way that you'd spend it instead of using a debit card would be your public key. Just like a debit card has a number on it, so does your Bitcoin address. For example, here is my public key. There's no reason for me not to share this because the worst that happens is someone sends me Bitcoin. And by all means, you can send me some Bitcoin. You can even use a QR code to make it even faster. To summarize everything, we have a miner that is similar to a programmer. The hard work that the miner does is equatable to math puzzles, the hash, that the program for Bitcoin does. The hard work or math puzzles produce gold and Bitcoin. And to make it official, gold is stamped while Bitcoin is made official through the ledger that is called blockchain. And to spend gold or money, we use a debit card, but when it comes to Bitcoin, we use a key. If you ever need help setting up your own account, definitely let me know. I'm happy to help. You can start getting Bitcoin on Coinbase, Cash App, and PayPal. These are probably the easiest ways. Have a wonderful day, and don't be like that guy that bought 2 pizzas for $1 billion.
$1 billion.